My name is Alara Vance. For most of my life, that name has been intrinsically tied to the scent of freshly turned earth, the cool weight of a graphite pencil in my hand, and the rustle of blueprint paper. I'm a landscape architect, or at least I was training to be one. I find peace in the logic of root systems and the gentle persuasion of a garden into bloom. My world is one of soft edges, patient growth, and the belief that any space, no matter how barren, can be coaxed back to life with enough care. It's a quiet profession, a quiet life, and until recently, it was all I ever wanted. The day my quiet life shattered, it didn't begin with a storm, but with the clinking of porcelain and the artificial warmth of a cafe. It was a Tuesday, the kind of gray, drizzly afternoon that makes the inside of any lit room feel like a sanctuary. I was supposed to be meeting Liam to finalize the guest list for our wedding. The invitations, printed on heavy, cream-colored stock with a delicate watercolor of willow branches I had painted myself, were sitting in a box on our dining room table. In 3 weeks, I was supposed to become Mrs. Alara Hayes. I didn't even get to sit down. He was already there at our usual corner table, a cup of untouched tea steaming in front of him. The air smelled of rain-soaked wool and baked sugar. I saw the look on his face as I approached, a carefully constructed neutrality that was more alarming than any anger or sorrow could have been. "We need to talk," he said, his voice so devoid of emotion it seemed to come from a great distance. A cold dread, slick and immediate, washed over me. I sank into the chair opposite him, my hands finding my lap, my fingers knotting together. "Okay," I said, my own voice a stranger's whisper. "Is this about your mother's seating arrangement? I told you we could move her closer to the front." He didn't smile at my attempt at normalcy. He simply looked at me, his familiar blue eyes now unreadable, like clouded glass. "It's not about the seating chart, Alara." He took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind one takes before delivering a verdict. "I can't marry you." The words hung in the air between us, small and yet immense, sucking all the warmth and sound from the room. The soft jazz playing from the speakers became a faint, tinny buzz. My heart, which had been fluttering with a nervous anticipation, seemed to stop altogether. "What?" "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he continued, his gaze drifting to the window, to the rain blurring the world outside. "About my career, about the direction I'm heading. We're just on different paths." It was the vagueness that hurt the most, the corporate, impersonal language used to dismantle a life we had built together over 4 years. "Different paths," I echoed, my throat tight. "We were on the same path 2 days ago when we were tasting wedding cakes." A flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or just impatience, crossed his face. He reached into the pocket of his tailored jacket and placed a small, dark blue box on the table. It wasn't to present to me, but to reclaim what was inside. "I've reconnected with someone," he admitted, his eyes finally meeting mine again. "Cassandra Thorne. We met at the firm's gala last month. Her father is Marcus Thorne." Marcus Thorne. The name was legendary in the city's development circles, a titan of industry who built glass towers that scraped the sky. Cassandra was his only daughter, a name I'd only ever seen in glossy society pages. I felt a wave of nausea. "You're leaving me for Cassandra Thorne?" The question was hollow, the answer already sitting in my stomach like a stone. "It's not about leaving you for her," he said, a classic, cowardly evasion. "It's about what makes sense for my life right now. She understands the world I'm moving into. It's a better alignment." He said alignment, as if our love was a miscalibrated machine that was finally being decommissioned. "You deserve someone who appreciates the simpler things. Your art, your gardens." He made my passion sound like quaint, childish hobbies. Then, as if he hadn't already carved out my heart, he gestured to my left hand. "And the ring. It's a Hayes family heirloom. My grandmother would want it to stay in the family." My hand felt suddenly heavy, alien. I looked down at the sapphire, a deep, velvety blue, flanked by 2 small diamonds. It had felt like a promise, a piece of his history that was now ours. Now, it was just a borrowed object. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the band. I slid it off and placed it gently on the polished wood of the table, next to the box. It looked small and lonely. "I hope you'll be very happy, Liam," I said, the politeness a thin shield over a chasm of pain. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked out of the cafe. I didn't look back. I walked past the laughing couple in the window, past the barista wiping down the counter, out into the cold, cleansing rain. I didn't begin to cry until I turned the corner, where no one could see the quiet, unassuming world of Alara Vance collapsing in on itself. I didn't go back to our apartment. I couldn't face the willow branch invitations, the half-written vows on my desk, the scent of his cologne on the towels in the bathroom. But when I finally forced myself to go, late that night, the decision had already been made for me. My belongings were packed. Not thrown into boxes, but sorted and stacked with an unnerving, sterile precision. Suitcases and labeled containers stood in a neat row by the door. Art supplies, books, clothing, studio files. It wasn't Liam's work. He was never that organized. It was the work of his mother, a woman who had always treated me with a cool, detached civility, as if I were a temporary exhibit in her son's life. I had been curated, cataloged, and was now being deaccessioned. My own small studio apartment, the one I had so joyfully given up just a month before, was now occupied by a music student. My savings, every last penny, had been poured into deposits for the venue, the caterer, the florist, all non-refundable. A quick check of my bank account revealed a balance of $87 and change. Payday was a week away. I sat on the floor of that silent hallway, surrounded by the neatly packed ruins of my future. For a long time, I did nothing. I just breathed in the scent of cardboard and dust. Then I did the one thing I hadn't needed to do in years. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking, and called my Aunt June. She answered on the second ring, her voice like warm honey. "Alara, darling. I was just thinking about you. I found that rare hellebore you were looking for. The deep plum one." A sob caught in my throat, thick and painful. I couldn't form words. And I didn't have to. That broken sound was enough. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice softening with an immediate, all-encompassing concern. "Where are you? Stay right there. I'm coming." An hour later, I was curled on her worn floral sofa, a mug of chamomile tea warming my frozen hands. The air in her little cottage smelled of lavender and old books. She had a massive, fluffy cat named Pip curled on my feet, and she was gently stroking my hair, just as she had when I was 10 years old and my parents had died, leaving me with a world that had suddenly become too big and too quiet. She didn't press for details. She just covered me with a hand-stitched quilt and said, "You have a home here, Alara. For as long as you need it. There's nothing you need to fix and nothing you need to be but here." I lay awake all night in the spare room, the one that looked out onto her wild, beautiful garden. The moonlight silvered the leaves of the climbing roses outside the window. I replayed Liam's words, his flat tone, the way he couldn't meet my eyes. Was I just a placeholder? A chapter he had to get through before the real story of his life began? The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was 29 years old, a landscape architect with no landscape, a bride with no groom, a woman with no home. I was back at the beginning. For 3 days, I existed in a fog. I helped Aunt June in her garden, my hands moving through the familiar motions of weeding and pruning, but my mind was a million miles away. I felt fragile, transparent, like a ghost haunting my own life. Friends called and texted, their messages full of bewildered concern. I answered with vague platitudes. We decided to postpone. It's complicated. I'm fine. Each lie felt like swallowing a shard of glass. On the third day, as I was repotting an orchid in the greenhouse, my old university professor, Dr. Albright, called. He was a stern, brilliant man who had been my mentor. "Alara," he said, his voice as crisp as ever. "June told me what happened. I am sorry to hear of the young man's supreme foolishness." I managed a weak, watery laugh. "Thank you, Dr. Albright. I'm not calling for condolences," he said briskly. "I'm calling about an opportunity. Do you remember my speaking of Julian Croft? The architectural innovator." The name was familiar. Croft Innovations was a firm known for its revolutionary work in sustainable design and biomimicry. They were legends. Of course, there was an accident. A climbing accident, I believe, about a year ago. He was severely injured. He's been in seclusion at his coastal estate ever since. The point is, he requires a full-time companion and caregiver. Not a nurse in the traditional sense, but someone with an understanding of structure, patience, and restoration. Someone who won't coddle him. His housekeeper, a formidable woman, has been through half a dozen candidates. They all fail. They can't handle his temperament or the isolation. He paused. She asked me if I knew of anyone with a spine of steel and a gentle hand. Your name came to mind. I was speechless. But I'm not a caregiver. I design gardens. You bring dead things back to life, Alara. It is not so different. The position is live-in. The estate is called Seacliff. It's remote, but from what I hear, magnificent. The salary is substantial. It would give you time and space. A place to put down new roots, if you'll pardon the pun. Escape. The word echoed in the empty chambers of my heart. A place where no one knew my name, or the name of the man who broke my heart. A place where I wouldn't have to see a willow branch and feel a fresh wave of grief. Do you have a number? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave me the number from Mrs. Davies, the estate manager. I waited until dusk, standing in Aunt June's garden as the sky turned a soft, bruised purple before I made the call. A cool, formal voice answered. Mrs. Davies, my name is Alara Vance. Dr. Albright suggested I call about the position with Mr. Croft. There was a short, assessing silence. Can you be here for an interview tomorrow at 10 in the morning? It was a 3-hour drive. Yes, I said, without hesitation. I can. The address is 4 Lighthouse Road, in Port Blossom Bay. Do not be late. The line clicked dead. That night, I packed a single bag. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I was in my beat-up car, driving west, away from the city, away from the life I had lost. The further I drove, the more the landscape changed. Tidy suburbs gave way to dense forests of fir and pine, and then, suddenly, the world opened up to the vast, gray expanse of the ocean. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt and mist. Seacliff was not a house, it was a fortress of solitude, built of dark, weathered stone and nestled into a cliff overlooking the turbulent water. It was magnificent and melancholy, like something out of a Gothic novel. A wrought iron gate, shaped like interwoven branches, swung open silently as I approached. A woman in a crisp, black dress met me at the heavy oak door. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon. This had to be Mrs. Davies. You are punctual, she stated, her tone neither warm nor cold. Follow me. The interview was conducted in a dim, wood-paneled study that smelled of beeswax and old paper. She reviewed my portfolio of landscape designs, my resume, my letter of recommendation from Dr. Albright. She asked me only 3 questions. Why do you want this job? Are you afraid of silence? And what is your definition of patience? I answered honestly. I needed a new beginning. I found silence restorative. And patience, I explained, was the quiet faith that growth is happening even when you cannot see it. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze unervingly perceptive. The position is yours if you want it, she said finally. The terms are generous. 24-hour availability, 1 weekend off per month. Private suite of rooms. All meals provided. Discretion is paramount. Mr. Croft is a complex man. He has not left this house in over a year. Your job is to be a steady presence, to assist with his physical regimen, manage his schedule, and provide companionship that is neither intrusive nor pitying. Do you understand? I nodded, my heart pounding. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of making. It was a sanctuary. It was an escape. It was everything I needed. I do. Good, she said, standing. Your contract is here. You can start tomorrow. Your patient is Mr. Julian Croft. The name still sounded like a myth. Soon, it would become my entire reality. The next morning, I stood before a set of tall, mahogany doors on the 2nd floor. The hallway was silent, the thick Persian runners swallowing the sound of my footsteps. Mrs. Davies stood beside me, a silent, black-clad sentinel. Are you ready? She asked, her voice low. Yes, I said, though my palms were damp. She knocked twice, a firm, decisive sound, and then pushed the door open without waiting for a reply. The room was immense, with a ceiling so high it seemed to belong to a cathedral. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking, terrifying view of the churning gray ocean below. The space was furnished with exquisite, minimalist pieces, but it felt empty, sterile, like a beautiful, luxurious prison. He was by the window, his back to us, silhouetted against the pale morning light. He was in a wheelchair, a sleek, modern contraption that looked more like a piece of technology than a medical device. Mr. Croft, Mrs. Davies said, her voice formal. This is Alara Vance, your new companion. He didn't turn immediately. He lifted a hand and gestured dismissively. You can go, Helen. Mrs. Davies gave me a single, brief nod and then retreated, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me alone with him. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, he turned the chair with a quiet whir of its motor. I had expected someone older, someone frail and diminished by his circumstances. Julian Croft was neither. He was in his mid-30s, with a lean, strong build that was evident even in his seated position. He had dark, unruly hair, a strong jawline shadowed with stubble, and the most intelligent, piercing gray eyes I had ever seen. But they were eyes shuttered with a profound weariness and a sharp, cutting cynicism. He looked at me not as a person, but as an object, another temporary fixture in his static world. "So," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone laced with unconcealed boredom. "Another one." He surveyed me from head to toe. "You're the gardener, aren't you?" Albright's little prodigy. "I'm a landscape architect," I corrected him gently. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "A semantic distinction. Tell me, Miss Vance, what's your record for keeping things alive?" The question was a barb, and I felt it sink in. But I refused to let him see me bleed. "I'd say my record is quite good," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I've learned you can't force anything to grow. You can only create the right conditions and wait." He raised a single, skeptical eyebrow. A flicker of something, not quite interest, but perhaps surprise, passed through his eyes. "How very philosophical. And what conditions do you imagine I require?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I'm here to find out." He wheeled his chair a little closer, his gaze intense. "Let's get one thing straight. I don't need a friend. I don't need a cheerleader. And I most certainly do not need your pity. You are here to follow a schedule, administer my medication, and assist with a physical therapy routine that is both tedious and pointless. Can you handle that?" "I'm not here to pity you, Mr. Croft," I said, meeting his stare. "I'm here to do a job." He tilted his head, a faint, mocking smile touching his lips. "We'll see." The last one cried on day 4. "Let's see if you can beat her record." "I'm not a crier," I said quietly. "A pity," he murmured, turning his chair back towards the window and the tumultuous sea. It might have been a welcome break in the monotony. The first days were a careful dance on a floor of glass. Our interactions were clipped, functional. I brought him his meals on a tray, which he ate in silence. I laid out his medications, which he took without comment. I read aloud from architectural journals, my voice even and calm, while he stared out at the ocean, his expression unreadable. He tested me constantly, with small, sharp cruelties. He would ask for a book from the highest shelf in the library, watching as I struggled to reach it. He would make a deliberately provocative comment about the futility of art or beauty, waiting for me to argue. But I didn't. I simply did what was asked, my demeanor quiet and unruffled. I was building a wall of my own, not of anger, but of patience. My sanctuary was the garden. It was a wreck, a beautiful, tragic mess of what had once been a masterpiece. Weeds choked the flower beds, thorny brambles strangled the rose bushes, and the stone paths were obscured by moss and decay. It was a perfect mirror of the man inside the house, neglected, wild, and fiercely resistant to being tamed. Every afternoon, during the 2 hours Julian insisted on being left completely alone, I would go out into the damp, salty air with my gloves and shears. I started in one small corner, clearing away the deadwood, pulling the tenacious weeds, turning the soil. It was slow, back-breaking work, but it was honest. My hands ached, my muscles protested, but for the first time in weeks, my mind was quiet. In the garden, there was no past, no future, only the present task. I wasn't the woman who was left, I was the woman who was tending. One afternoon, I looked up from my work to see him watching me from his window. His face was impassive, but he didn't turn away. He just watched as I gently pruned a rose bush, cutting away the thorns to give the new buds a chance at sunlight. We stayed like that for a long time, separated by a pane of glass and a world of pain, a silent, unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. The breakthrough came on a stormy night, 2 weeks into my employment. The wind howled around the stone manor, rattling the window panes, and the sea crashed against the cliffs with a furious, relentless rhythm. I couldn't sleep. A strange disquiet had settled over me, a feeling that something was amiss. I slipped out of my room and walked through the dark, silent halls. A sliver of light was showing from under the door of the grand conservatory at the far end of the west wing, a part of the house that was always kept locked. My heart quickened. I pushed the door open a crack and peered inside. The conservatory was a vast, glass-domed room filled with the ghostly shapes of long-dead exotic plants. And in the center of the room, he was there. He was standing. He was gripping a pair of custom-made parallel bars, his arms shaking with a violent, terrifying effort. His face was pale, contorted with a mixture of agony and pure, ferocious determination. Sweat dripped from his brow, his knuckles were white where he clung to the metal supports. He took a single, halting, agonizing step. And then another. I gasped, a small, involuntary sound. It was enough. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with fury and something else, shame. He saw me, and the raw effort on his face instantly hardened into a mask of rage. Get out, he snarled, his voice a ragged whisper. I didn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my mind reeling. He hadn't given up. He wasn't resigned to his fate. He was fighting. In secret, in the dead of night, he was fighting a war no one knew he was waging. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked, my voice soft, stepping fully into the room. Because I didn't want an audience for my failure, he shot back, his body trembling so hard I was afraid he would collapse. The moment people see a flicker of hope, they start demanding a miracle. They want the old Julian back. They don't want this. He gestured angrily at his shaking legs. This broken, pathetic version. I watched them all walk away when they realized I wasn't going to just stand up and be whole again. My friends. My business partners. I will not perform my recovery for anyone else's benefit. So you pretend, I said, understanding dawning like a slow, painful sunrise. You pretend you've accepted it, so no one can be disappointed in you. So no one can hurt you again. His jaw tightened. You don't know anything. I walked closer, slowly, as one would approach a cornered, wounded animal. I know what it feels like to be discarded, I said quietly. To have the future you planned for snatched away without explanation. And I know what it's like to have to build something new from the ruins, all by yourself. His furious gaze faltered. For the first time, the wall of his cynicism cracked, and I saw the raw vulnerability beneath. He stared at me, his breathing harsh and uneven. Slowly, with a groan of pain and exhaustion, he lowered himself back into his wheelchair. I won't tell anyone, I promised, my voice barely audible over the storm outside. This can be our secret. But you don't have to do it alone. Let me help you. Not as a nurse, but as an architect. We can rebuild this. Together. He was silent for a long time, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The only sound was the wind and the rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. Fine, he finally muttered, without looking at me. A single word that felt like a seismic shift. We do this my way, he added, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual command. No one knows. Not Mrs. Davies, not Albright. No one. And when I say stop, we stop. Agreed. Agreed, I said. He finally lifted his head and looked at me, his gray eyes searching mine. The mockery was gone, replaced by a weary, cautious assessment. You are not at all what I expected, Miss Vance. Good, I replied with a small smile. I was hoping to surprise you. Our secret alliance transformed the rhythm of our days. The daylight hours remained the same, a carefully orchestrated performance of his supposed apathy. But after the house fell silent each night, we would meet in the conservatory. Our work was slow, painstaking. Each step he took was a victory hard-won against the rebellion of his own body. There were nights he collapsed in frustration, his fists beating against the floor mats, his voice raw with curses. There were nights his progress was so infinitesimal it was almost imperceptible. I never offered empty platitudes. I didn't say, you can do it or don't give up. Instead, I offered quiet, steady support. I learned how to brace his body, how to read the subtle signs of muscle fatigue. I researched new physical therapy techniques, I charted his progress in a private journal, and sometimes, when the frustration became too much, I would simply sit with him in the silence, a quiet presence that asked for nothing. Slowly, a fragile trust began to bloom in that forgotten, glass-walled room, as tentative and precious as the first green shoots in the neglected garden outside. He started talking, not just about the pain or the therapy, but about his work. He spoke of buildings that breathed, of materials that healed themselves, of cities designed in harmony with nature. His mind was a brilliant, beautiful place, and I found myself captivated. In turn, I told him about my own dreams of designing therapeutic gardens for hospitals and recovery centers, spaces that could facilitate healing. He would listen, his head tilted, his expression thoughtful. For the first time, he saw me not as a caregiver, but as a peer. We were two broken people, finding a way to rebuild, not just his body, but our own private world. The first intrusion from the outside world came in the form of a man named Marcus Hayes. He arrived one sunny afternoon unannounced, striding into the house with an air of arrogant ownership. He was handsome in a slick, polished way, dressed in an expensive suit, a stark contrast to the rugged, isolated world of Seacliff. Mrs. Davies's lips were pressed into a thin, disapproving line as she showed him into the sunroom where Julian and I were reviewing architectural plans. "Julian, my friend. Look at you, still king of your castle," Marcus said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "Marcus," Julian replied, his own voice cool and clipped. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" This was my first time meeting the man who was now engaged to Cassandra Thorne, the woman for whom Liam had left me. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. He was Liam's new partner at the firm. The world, it seemed, was cruelly, claustrophobically small. Marcus's eyes flickered to me, a quick, dismissive appraisal. "This the new one?" he asked Julian, as if I weren't there. "This is Alara Vance," Julian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My associate." The word associate hung in the air. It was a promotion, a redefinition of my role, and I saw a flash of surprise in Marcus's eyes before he masked it with a smooth smile. He turned his charm on me, asking superficial questions about my work, his eyes lingering a moment too long. I answered with a polite, professional chill. The conversation quickly turned to business. Marcus spoke of a major new urban development project, the Vance Tower, a partnership with Thorne Consolidated. My blood ran cold. He slid a thick portfolio of documents across the table towards Julian. "The board is getting antsy," Julian, Marcus said, his voice losing some of its forced cheerfulness. "We need your sign-off on the capital transfer to move forward. Thorne is putting up the majority of the initial investment, but they want controlling interest in the new joint venture. It's just a formality. Your signature gives us the green light." Julian didn't reach for the documents. He kept his hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair. "I'll review them." "There's nothing to review," Marcus pressed, a hint of irritation in his voice. "It's the deal of a lifetime. It will secure the firm's future for the next decade. We can't let this slip away because you're preoccupied." The insinuation was clear. "Because you're broken." I said, Julian repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "I will review them." Marcus held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Fine, fine. Just don't take too long. Cassandra's father isn't known for his patience." He clapped Julian on the shoulder, a gesture of faint camaraderie that made me flinch, and then he was gone. That night, in the conservatory, the air was thick with tension. Julian was silent, his movements during his exercises jerky and unfocused. "There's something wrong with those documents," I said finally, unable to hold it in any longer. He stopped, bracing himself on the parallel bars, his back to me. "What makes you say that?" "The way he pushed you. The urgency. And the name. Thorne. Liam, my ex-fiancé, he left me for Cassandra Thorne. Her father is Marcus Thorne." Julian was very still. "The world is smaller than we think." "It's not just that," I insisted, my intuition screaming. "He's a partner at Liam's firm, Hayes and Sterling. This feels connected. Like a web. Why would Thorne Consolidated need controlling interest in a joint venture with a smaller firm unless they were planning a buyout? And why does it all hinge on your signature?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he slowly turned to face me. His expression was grim. "For the last year, Marcus has been my proxy on the board of Croft Innovations. I gave him power of attorney over my shares." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. "He's not trying to partner with you," I whispered. "He's trying to use your own company's capital, leveraged by Thorne, to effectively stage a hostile takeover from within. And he needs you to sign off on the initial transfer to make it look legitimate." Julian's face was a mask of cold fury. He had been betrayed. By his oldest friend, the man he had trusted with his legacy. The man who was using his tragedy as an opportunity. "Get the documents from my study," he said, his voice low and hard as steel. For the next week, Seacliff became a war room. The conservatory was no longer just a place for physical rehabilitation, it was where we plotted our counterattack. By day, I was the quiet companion. By night, I was his researcher, his confidant, his strategist. We pored over the documents Marcus had left, and with the help of a discreet corporate lawyer Julian had on retainer, we began to uncover the full extent of the scheme. It was a complex web of shell corporations and deceptive clauses, designed to strip Julian of his controlling shares in Croft Innovations and fold its assets into a new entity controlled by Thorne and Marcus. As Julian's mind sharpened for the fight, his body seemed to follow. His steps became stronger, more confident. The fire in his eyes was no longer just about defiance, it was about reclamation. He was taking back his life, piece by piece. One evening, as we sat in the library surrounded by papers, he looked up at me. He underestimated me, he said, a grim smile on his face. They all did. They saw the chair, and they stopped seeing the man. They're about to be reminded of who that man is, I replied. The day of the emergency board meeting, a palpable tension filled the air at Seacliff. I helped Julian dress. He chose a dark charcoal suit, impeccably tailored, and a crisp white shirt. For the first time since I had arrived, he looked not like a patient, but like the CEO he was. He stood before the full-length mirror, leaning lightly on a sleek, minimalist cane. He was still not perfectly steady, but he was upright. He was standing on his own 2 feet. I want them to see me walk in, he said, his voice resolute. I drove us to the city. As we walked into the gleaming, impersonal lobby of the Croft Innovations building, a hush fell over the employees. Whispers followed us like a ripple in water. People stared, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. The ghost of Seacliff had returned. The boardroom was filled with stern-faced executives. Marcus was at the head of the table, looking confident and smug. Cassandra Thorne was there, seated beside him, a portrait of cool elegance. And next to her, looking small and out of his depth, was Liam. His eyes widened in shock when he saw me walk in behind Julian. He looked away quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. Julian walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the table. Each step was amplified in the tense silence of the room. He didn't take his assigned seat. Instead, he stood at the head of the table, opposite Marcus, and rested both hands on the back of the chair. Good morning, he said, his voice calm and commanding. The room seemed to hold its breath. I believe you were expecting a signature from me today. Instead, I'd like to present a few documents of my own. With a quiet nod from me, I placed a stack of files in front of him. For the next hour, Julian calmly and methodically dismantled Marcus's entire scheme. He laid out the evidence of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy. He exposed the shell corporations, the falsified reports, the secret agreements with Thorne Consolidated. Marcus's face went from smug to confused to ashen. Liam looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Cassandra's mask of cool composure finally cracked, her eyes glittered with fury. This is absurd, she spat, standing up. You have no proof. On the contrary, Julian said, gesturing to his lawyer who stood by the door. We have everything, including sworn affidavits from 2 of your own accountants. It seems loyalty can be bought, but it can also be earned. Marcus, it appears, is not very good at the latter. He then turned his gaze on his former friend. I am calling for an immediate vote to remove Marcus Hayes from the board and as a partner in this firm, effective immediately. All in favor. Every hand in the room went up. It was over. As the room descended into chaos, Marcus was escorted out by security. Cassandra shot Julian a look of pure venom before sweeping out of the room. Liam scurried after her, not once looking in my direction. When the room was finally empty, it was just Julian and me. He sank into the chair, the adrenaline leaving him, his body trembling with exhaustion. But his eyes were bright, clear, and alive. You did it, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm and steady. No, Alara, he said, his voice soft. We did. In that moment, looking at him, I realized my own healing had been happening alongside his. The shame and heartbreak that had driven me to Seacliff felt like a distant memory, a story that had happened to someone else. I hadn't just helped him stand up, I had learned to stand on my own. The weeks that followed the boardroom battle were filled with a new kind of quiet. The victory had been decisive, but the work of rebuilding was slow. Julian began to re-engage with his company, taking meetings from his study at Seacliff, his mind sharp and focused. The house itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Mrs. Davies smiled more. Sunlight seemed to find its way into previously shadowed corners. And the garden thrived. Under my care, the roses began to bloom in defiant bursts of crimson and pale pink. The pathways were cleared. A small stone bench, once covered in ivy, became our favorite spot to sit in the late afternoons, talking quietly as we watched the sun set over the ocean. Our relationship settled into a gentle, unspoken rhythm. The line between patient and caregiver, employer and employee, had long since blurred. We were partners. We were friends. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I felt the pull of something more, a deep, resonant connection that hummed between us. One evening, we were sitting on that bench, a cool sea breeze rustling the leaves around us. The sky was awash in soft lavender and gold. I've been thinking about the future, Julian said, breaking the comfortable silence. He no longer used the wheelchair at all, relying only on the cane for longer walks. Oh, I said, turning to look at him. I'm restructuring the foundation arm of my company, he said. I want to focus on creating therapeutic and accessible public spaces. Healing gardens, sensory parks for children with special needs, restorative environments for urban centers. He paused, his gray eyes searching my face. I want you to run it. I was stunned into silence. Julian. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he said gently. It's your vision, Alara. I just want to give you the resources to build it on a larger scale. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, simple wooden box. My heart gave a sudden, sharp leap. Before you panic, he said, a small, wry smile on his lips, this isn't what you think it is. It's not an obligation. It's a question. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was not a diamond, but a single, perfectly smooth piece of sea glass, a pale, translucent green, set in a simple, elegant band of white gold. It looked like a captured drop of the ocean. I know we're both still finding our footing, he said, his voice low and earnest. We've both been broken, and we're still putting the pieces back together. I'm not asking you to fix me, or for you to let me fix you. I'm just asking if you would consider walking the rest of this path with me, as my partner, in every sense of the word. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow or loss. They were tears of a profound, quiet joy. The man who had once been encased in bitterness and cynicism was offering me a future built on mutual respect and shared creation. The ring wasn't an heirloom from a past I couldn't share. It was a promise of a future we could build together. I reached out and took the box from his hand. I looked from the sea glass ring to his hopeful, vulnerable face. I thought of the woman who had arrived at Seacliff months ago, shattered and lost. I thought of the quiet strength I had found in the solitude, in the soil, in the steady presence of the man beside me. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I'm not saying yes just yet, I whispered, a smile breaking through my tears. But I'm not saying no. He laughed, a real, warm sound that was carried away on the sea breeze. For a landscape architect, he said, taking my hand in his, you're remarkably good at leaving things open-ended. It's the best way to leave room for growth, I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. We didn't need a definitive answer. There was no rush. We had time. We sat there as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the sea glass on my finger cool against my skin, a quiet testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful things are born from what has been broken and worn smooth by the relentless tide. The future was an undesigned garden, waiting for us together to bring it into bloom.